Welcome back to the Into Greatness podcast with Jason and Jolene. I am Jason.
And I'm Jolene.
We are hot off the success of our nutrition episode last week, which was a lot of fun.
Yes.
There's so much information there, and there's so much more we could talk about. Amy's got to come back.
Yeah, I agree. And we're excited to hear what changes it has inspired in y'all's lives.
I'm just glad that my whiskey and beer thing can continue on at the end of the day.
Right. And like she said, if you're choosing a higher calorie dense beer like an IPA or something, be careful about what you're consuming with and around that, right?
Well, it's probably why I can't drink those.
Yeah.
Because it just doesn't sit well with me. No.
Yeah.
This week, it is getting close to Father's Day. I don't think it's happened yet by the time this has come up, but we're getting there.
Yeah, we're getting there.
We missed Mother's Day. Sorry, moms.
That's okay.
Right?
To be fucking expected. Every day's Mother's Day. Mom!
All right. That's totally true, actually.
Yeah, but one day a year, people call Dad. Just kidding.
Yeah, so I don't even know how to respond.
Yeah. So okay, here we go.
Here we go. Father's Day.
Yeah, when we look at the spectrum of what this brings up, right? We have many different relationships we look at these times, right? And a lot of times it's not just a day of celebration. Sometimes it's a day of grieving the relationships we didn't have with our primary caregivers or whatever. So this can be because of a physical absence. So maybe fathers were not involved in our lives. They were not present. Maybe some of us don't know our fathers, right? Maybe some of us have lost our fathers to grief or to death, as Jason and I have. Maybe some of us are grieving an active loss of parent through addiction or what is it when you don't like disown the family, but you estranged, right?
Yep.
Maybe estranged relationships based on family dynamics or something. That's really common in different separations and stuff like that. And you could be like literally going through a grief process with a dying parent right now. I know my caseload is sort of frenzied with that right now. It's just a stage of life for a lot of gentlemen that I'm working with. Or you can have the experience of having a really positive male figure in your life, whether it's a father, whether it's somebody who acts as though they are your father.
The surrogate father, the stepdad.
Yeah, all of the things. So we're going to jump into all of this in all of the ways that honor, the role that dads and fathers have in our lives, good, bad, neutral, whatever they be.
And I think it's a good conversation to have because we're definitely at a point where our society's kind of got this like we've talked about this before. There's this weird old white male thing going on due to a few select people who are making it really bad for the rest of us. Right. But I think, and there's been a whole like anti-manhood, toxic masculinity thing going on. Anti-patriarch, right? All that kind of stuff's happening, right?
I'm here.
But we all need both male and female presences in our lives. They're both very important.
I also am going to give big kudos to the generation of men that have come up in the last 20 years in terms of them being way more active outside of pink and blue roles, the same way women have been in the household, right? Like there's way more dads active in the pregnancies and the birth process, and they're included. They feel like I have a part to play in some of this.
Because they do.
Yeah, they do.
Right?
But traditionally they didn't. They were the primary like financial providers. They could not stay home or tend to the home because the woman typically didn't bring in that, and there was a big divide because they physically or time constraint wise were not present for those moments.
Yep. And labor was different too, so you work your ass off 8-12 hours a day in a hard manual labor job, you're done.
Absolutely.
Right? Which isn't an excuse, but it's just the way the world was.
So I think the world now is offering more opportunities for dads to become involved in whole ways if they want to.
Yes, which I think is good.
Would you say, Jay?
I'd say so.
Yeah. I heard you upstairs with Griffin earlier. Is he home today?
He's home today.
Yeah.
So I'm there keeping an eye on him. Jess is out running errands and has some work to do and stuff like that, right?
Totally. That would have been unheard of back in the day, right?
Yeah.
You know?
Oh, yeah.
So I just think that in itself is a really cool opportunity.
Yeah, and I think it should be embraced.
Yes, a lot of people will take parental leave now, like a paternity. They'll take a parental leave because, I know quite a few people where the woman was actually more of the breadwinner and the flexibility in the man's job to come and go was a bit better. So they would stay home for half the pregnancy or half the maternity or whatever. So those are definitely options that I think they might have been societally shamed or poo-pooed before.
I think even when I was at the paper when Griffin was born 12 years ago, I couldn't have taken time off.
No.
That's like 12 years ago.
Yeah. And that was like a daily thing. That was like, no, we need you now, and
Yeah.
we need you 10 hours from now, and
Yeah.
we need you 12 hours from now. Like,
There was just didn't happen, right?
Yeah.
But I know friends that have had like their second baby now 4, and he could stay home for part of it.
yeah.
Like that's how quickly that changed.
Yeah. Okay. So, Jason, why don't you talk about the father-like roles or the father roles in your life and what your experiences of them are, how you're reflecting them on Father's Day?
I've been fortunate that I've had good male role models. Like there's my father. Like I was adopted, but I've only had one dad that I've ever known, and he was amazing. He was better than the mom was. Of course, he died when I was 19, so that was a big kick in the teeth when that happened. But he was someone. What he taught me is that I was an equal. I wasn't the child. I was an equal. He would ask me for advice or my thoughts on things, and he was like a contractor builder guy. So he's like, I'm working on this project. Like, and he'd explain. He goes, "What do you think?" And it got me I'd have to think, right? And he always talked the same. He never talked down. He never used remember there was a time when we were growing up, Jolene, where there was sometimes a certain way parents would talk to kids. It was like a talking down.
Yeah.
He never talked down.
Wow.
We were always equal. So that's something I've always tried to do with Griffin, is bring that in. And then I also had a grandfather, Grandpa Newell, who was my mom's stepdad. And he was like the ultimate grandfather. Like he was a soldier in World War II, like landed on Juno Beach. I've talked about him before. Then he was a firefighter in civilian life. But he would do, like, when we went to Disneyland or the carnival, he'd go on all the rides with me. We'd do stuff together. Like he was, and when I'd go visit him in Chilliwack, he'd take me to the fire hall. So all the firefighters knew who I was. And we just did all that cool shit. And then I had an Uncle Doug. He was pretty amazing. Like he was like a Oxford educated pilot in World War II, taught at UBC. Like I've been really lucky to have these very positive male role models who were, I would say, all traditionally very masculine.
Yeah.
But were more than that. Like they were smart, they were educated, they were compassionate. You know what I mean? They had senses of humor. They allowed themselves moments of vulnerability. And I think I was really fortunate to have that, because I don't know a lot of people in my age bracket who had dads that were like that, or male role models that were like that as a whole.
Absolutely. A lot of men your age will talk about really hard childhoods. There's a lot of abuse. That is very generationally. A lot of men I work with in my practice and just in general, that generation, a lot of them were physically abused by their fathers.
Which is crazy to me.
It's wild to me, right? It's this whole idea of man up.
Yeah.
Right. But then you also think, like, what is tormented in that person to need to have to do that to that child, right?
Yeah.
And typically the boys, right?
Yeah. No, you never hear about the girls much.
You know, actually, I can't say that. I take that back, because even just someone I was working with last week, you know, it didn't matter. The girls definitely got a lack of respect, and the boys earned the respect through those ways. It was a very, gender biased for sure. And then watching even how maybe that's like the mom is treated, or even just that relational dynamic there. But yeah, I would say, Jason, that's not a common report for men of your generation, because of what the generation of your dad, what they weren't equipped with. They weren't. They came from a different era, and their dads were in war a lot of the time, and just in
hard physical labor jobs.
Came through the Depression.
Yeah, like my dad, Grandpa Hewlett worked in forestry. Lost an eye, still kept working in forestry, but he traveled a lot. So literally, and they were dirt poor, like they'd live in tents. And whenever they'd move to a new town, they'd build a house. So Dad would go to school all day, and then after school go home and contribute to the building of the house.
Wow.
Like, could you imagine? And that's like for his entire, until he was basically in late high school and they moved to Kamloops.
Wow.
And then they built that house and then stayed there. But could you imagine that? Like, and our kids, we complained about having to go to like a work at McDonald's after school. Like, think about that for a minute. You have to build your fucking house that you're going to live in.
Absolutely. And even looking at cultural differences, right? So I know some folks that came from Korean backgrounds and what their relationships like with their dads look like, or, you know, Southeast Asian backgrounds or different things, right? So even factoring in the cultural implications of either respect of the male genes in the family, or certain morals or principles of those expectations of them, right? Just and then the survival needs of them at those times too, right? If we're trying to just kind of broaden out, because I'm always aware that we speak from a Caucasian perspective, hey, like, so there's always those other factors there. For myself, I would say, I always talk about, the relationship and of my dad relatively positively for sure. But I recognize, he had a stroke when he was younger. So the whole right side of his body was paralyzed, which meant he had a brain injury. He had chronic pain. He very clearly suffered with those things. So every day was a trudge through mud for him. So he was a really talented man. He was very handy. He was very intelligent. He was a jack of all trades. Like he could do a lot that way. And was just so life skills and like just smart, road smart, street smart, and I always really admired that about him. But emotionally, so I'm gonna say unavailable, but it was stunted. It was trauma, right? I mean, like his dad died when he was very young. Both my grandma and grandpa were in the war. Mm-hmm. And I think my grandpa was he died of pneumonia or an illness of some sort when my dad was 3. So my grandma, being a single mom of 2 kids back then and a veteran herself, she couldn't raise kids. She couldn't even get a mortgage at that point, right? Back in those days. So she remarried. And my understanding of the stepdad my dad had was locked cupboards, abuse, some things like that. So there were things there that we didn't know about, right? So that was the grandpa I knew growing up, and there was sort of intermittent, visits, and there was definitely something there that you were like, oh, okay, well, this man waits in the car while my grandma visits us and things like that, right? But knowing that about my dad, I understand where he was kind of inaccessible. And for me, the wounds that would have created is the emotionally unavailable man. Mm-hmm. And certainly abandonment wounds with him dying of suicide. But I, in general, considered myself having a really good relationship with him. It was kind of me and him, and then my sister and my mom were sort of the amigos. They were partnered, right? So I definitely speak fondly of him there. In the loss, and I had a grandpa, on my mom's side, my grandpa was amazing too, but he also was at war for many years of his life, right? So, and he died very early. Most of my grandparents died by the time I was 19.
Yeah.
Right?
Which
so
is young.
Yeah, very young. There's not a lot of people that have, So I have had the privilege of having people kind of scoop me under their wings and be father-like figures. So I have an old math teacher who is a pseudo dad to me, who just kind of scooped me up. Mm-hmm. And I'm so grateful because him and his wife are like grandparents to my kids, and they are the kindest, most generous blessing in our life for many, many years now. And then I have people, like my godfather, and people who were really good friends of my mom's that, would help me with the things like vehicles or this or that as time went on, sort of thing. So I've had the privilege of having father-like figures in my life. And then also I look at my partner now, and he is, he's an amazing father. He is a really involved father. He is a emotionally attuned father. He looks at the needs and proactively tends to them before those kids even know they need them. And that is something
That's
else.
Something, yeah.
And I know what that feels like to be a partner receiving that, but to be a kid or a teenager, a young adult, to receive that is, you're changing generations at that point, right?
Yeah.
And I even just said to him the other day, I was like, I hope your daughter, when she's dating and grows up and all that, I hope she finds a man that loves her the way you love her, because that is something else. It took me years to find that, right?
Well, I think this is a bit off topic, but I think whoever we are, as the father or the daughter, and the son or the daughter, we do seek a partner that is reflective of what we know.
Yeah.
I think we do it subconsciously. We're not even aware of what we're doing, right? But I think that
usually
happens.
it's negative stuff.
It's negative stuff, though.
Yeah.
So if he's already doing that, hopefully she will have greater luck of finding a guy like that.
Yeah, we look at that attachment perspective in theory, right? And that would be a secure attachment, right?
Yeah, you're familiar with it. You want something familiar, good or bad, you just want something familiar.
Totally. So much regulation there too, right? And then I look at how my kids thrive in that. They love, they will randomly out of nowhere just be like, Mom, Kevy's so kind. He's so nice to us. Where is he? Okay, can I call him? They crave him. And I get it. I crave him too. But they do, and
Yeah.
it's this really safe presence, right? And like those are the positive impacts, right? But so it's really beautiful to see how he has not only taken me in, but also he loves me and my children as a package, right?
Yeah.
And I of course do the same. So that's where we offer that to each other. But witnessing sort of those kinds of things, and it really, I just have so much respect for single dads out there and dads that are stepping up, because you guys don't get enough credit.
There's very little credit, because there are, like, one of my oldest friends, Carl, he's a single father of
Yeah.
4.
Yeah.
4 boys. Like, for fuck, could you imagine that? There are single dads out there, and they don't.
Yeah.
They're not talked about as much. I think because it is rarer.
It's not the norm.
It's not the norm, and I think rare is the father awarded full custody. So I think when there are single dads, it's usually out of some tragedy or a bad, you know what I mean? So it just doesn't get the press, for lack of a better word, that quite often happens with single moms.
Yeah, I feel like I recently learned that there is a default that unless there is some tragic issue with the mom will almost always receive guardianship or primary or something. Yeah. So yeah, I agree with you. It's only the exception to the rule. But I just think, there's a lot of really deadbeat dads out there, right?
And now we're finding deadbeat moms.
Absolutely. We hear about it, right? And I really want to like pump the tires of those who are showing up and again, doing better than what they had. And that's really the biggest thing that we're looking at intergenerationally is how do we do better?
Yeah.
How do we do better than what we had?
And I think that's what's neat. I think we're seeing that happen. I think like our kids' generations is going to be a huge jump forward because their parents are trying harder, right? Because I think there was this weird period, there's this weird stretch of like weird parenting. That's all I can describe it. There was almost like, how there's like too much free range parenting and both parents were working and they were very much of a me generation. I think we're seeing a correction in that. So I think it's just getting better.
Do you know what my thought is? You know what my thought is?
What?
I actually think it's people like you and I in these generations raising these kids who are finally doing their work. Because I guarantee you at 42, 51?
Almost 2.
Almost 2. Our parents weren't sitting here doing this work. I remember my mom was smoking cigarettes at the kitchen table with the lady down the street and they kind of bitched during the day or had their coffee talk or whatever, right? Men might go and have drinks at the bar or watch the sports game. They're not talking about the hard stuff. We talked about this in like a men's health kind of reflection-y episode, right? Of like, they weren't talking about the hard stuff, like check in on your friends kind of thing. It was the unspoken or keeping people in unhealthy places to just normalize what one was feeling, right? And this is the mom's wine club as well. Like I'm not, that shit is so unhealthy. You're not okay, right? It's one thing to like do it for bits and pieces here and there, but don't normalize it to the degree that like you are running from something so difficult inside of you right now.
Oh, and there is a whole culture out there in the world. This is a completely different topic. But if you look at like even like something like social media now, which isn't social, it's a numb out. It's all memes and funny videos and stuff that's absolutely inconsequential, but it's there and people lose hours they're just not dealing.
Yeah.
I don't want to cope with what's going on, so I'm just going to go do this.
Porn for a lot of men.
Porn for a lot of men. You just don't want to fucking deal with it.
Yeah. And what that does, we know from a biological perspective of like what that's doing to masculinity in general. And this is where I'm a big fan of old school polarity. And we talked about that in Battle Over the Genders.
I remember that.
Tango of the Genders episode or season 1. But we talk about this. Like I actually like old school ways where there are traditional ways that we sink into the most beneficial parts of our power, right? Like being driven and motivated as a man, right? Having a strong work ethic, all of these things. They also are like testosterone based. So when we are like things like pornography, numbing out, poor diet, things like that, reduce testosterone. Well, now you have, let's go back to caveman days. Let's go back to the biology of us. You have men that are probably half as equipped to go out and get that food and provide now.
Oh God, if suddenly something happened where like in the short period of time we went back to almost caveman or like like frontier days, we would be fucked.
Yeah.
Like, and the job that men are traditionally supposed to do, we couldn't do it.
Yeah.
As a whole, a lot of us.
And there's talk about like what the patriarchy did in terms of like getting women to, you know, and I think feminist movements did this a lot of like women over participating so much in there that they're burning out in their own superpowers of being nurturing and loving and receiving. But then it also means that the man doesn't innately thrive to provide and create safety anymore because he's like, oh, well, it's kind of taken care of.
Yeah, oh yeah, for sure.
And that actually robs you of so much of your drive and your purpose. And I think this is where we fall into these lazy zones. And I use that term loosely, but you know, I think of Arnold Schwarzenegger and these like pivotal places where people get into this sloppy part of their life and then they're like, holy fuck, something's got to change. Yeah. And they slide back into that very focused, disciplined, very like growth oriented place again, right? Yeah.
Which I think we should be in. You shouldn't be burning yourself out with the grind kind of thing, but we need purpose.
Yep.
That's basically what it comes down to. We just need everybody needs a purpose.
And for the men in today's society, us women who are overmasculated, I hold my hand up because I am, and I am forced to be, but as a trauma response of proving myself, I also did that to myself, right? So that's what I spend a lot of time balancing. But I mean, I go back and I look at relationships I was in and I was like, yeah, that's very demasculating for the man. Like, I don't need you. I can take care of this myself. Right.
Yeah.
And that was a big thing with Kevin and I. Like, we both choose each other. We don't need each other, but we're like, oh, we fucking need each other. We know we do in all the right ways. Yeah. Right. But it's not a codependency type thing. But there was this, like, there's this functioning over compensating role that women play now that does demasculate the men in our Western culture.
Well, to the point where you're hearing out there that a lot of men are like, ah, fuck it.
In a sense. And right? I look at some of these 20-year-olds and they can because their mom is still folding their laundry or this or that. No, right? Man. Like, I try and tell the girls, like, trust me, you don't want to mother somebody like that because that shit will die a painful death later on. And it does. It creates resentment. Your needs aren't met. And there's nothing less attractive than a man who doesn't want to get his shit together and take care of his stuff. That is what's like, that's the primal turn on for women, right? And again, we're using gender terms loosely, right? Yep. There's going to be masculine and feminine partnerships where people fall into roles, right?
But as a traditional way of looking at it. I think if anyone is attractive if they can take care of their own shit. It doesn't matter if you're male or female, right? Like, I don't want to be with a woman who is too needy of me. Like, I never have. Yes,
but the other thing is like, you also want a woman who needs you to take care of shit.
Of course. At the same time. Yeah. Because it's a fine, delicate balance, right?
I need her to receive what I have to give.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it in order to build that deeper connection.
For sure.
But not be like, I need you to do this all the time. Or, you know what I mean? Where it's just like, oh, for fuck's sake, can't you do anything yourself?
Yeah.
Like, you know,
and this is where men go out and they feel like they're give in the world to all of the things that they're doing. And then they come home and it feels like another drain or another pull. So it's like, what are you offering back to fill that tank? And that's where the care and the nurturing and all of those extra pieces that might not have a monetary value. They might not have the time and productivity value. But for a lot of men, they will say the way you love and care for me when I come home or whatever that be in the relationship or container, that is like so much of the contribution. And we've just devalued that here. But yeah, so when you look at like the roles males have played in your life, when we look at Father's Day as a whole, how do we celebrate men? How do we hold the losses of that day? Mm-hmm. Like, what are primary losses for you?
I guess it would be losing well, actually, all the primary male role models in my life are dead now, right? Really. I have other like relatives, and of course, my Sifu, my instructor, like he doesn't really, I don't work with him anymore, but he was a big positive influence too. But yeah, they're just not there. So for me now, it's kind of me to deal with the loss being present by being present for my son, to be there as he needs me.
I was going to say, you're also in this, like this aging role in your life where you were always looking up to those mentors, but now you're the up. Yeah. You're up there. Like you're up there. Now you're looking down.
Yeah. And that's a different place to be in. It's a bit scary, actually.
It is. Yeah.
Right? And then trying to, in a way, feel like you're living up to that role at the same time with a body that's not cooperating as well to perform at the level that I used to perform. So dealing with the aging process at the same time.
And you're also doing it very differently. And that's the defiance piece of I am going to look up to that, but there are certain things I'm not hitting because I've changed.
Yeah.
There are other things I am adding to this and shifting and adjusting, right? Like this is father edition 4.0 or whatever, right?
It's a different version of what a father is.
We go to yin yoga, bitch.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Right?
For myself, it's funny because I have had to teeter on this, like playing a father role at times for my kids in weird things, right? Like especially my son in hockey, there was a lot of that. And it's very interesting to see the different perspectives and how, I remember one dad, he was just like, he says, that's a mom job. And I was like, yeah, you know what it is. And he's like, that's not a dad job. And it was like the dad job was the hard lesson of like, well, you shouldn't have left your gear wet in your bag or something like that. Yeah. But this kid's crying. He's 9 years old. And the dad wasn't a dick, but it is like there's a harder edge that I don't want to. And I specifically said, like with my kid at a couple points, I'm like, I rag on this kid to do things all day long, get to school, do this and that. Like, I am going to encourage him in sports. I am not going to rag on him. That is not my job. If you want to give him shit feedback, you do it. It comes from your mouth, not mine. Because that is that's not a mom job.
No, it's true.
And I did. I had a dad like stick up and be like, that's not a mom job, right? But it was funny because with this one kid, like his dad's job was to give the consequence, but I'm looking at him crying and I'm like, listen, like I'll take your gloves and I'll put them under the vent for you. I'll dry them in the dryer, right? And he was like, no. So sure enough, I did it. And he was fine. He was great after. But I get that wasn't something maybe the dad could have done in that dynamic. Yep. But I always wonder, what would have happened if he did?
Because there's a way, I think, to do the mom and the dad job at the same time. And like, see, this is what happens when you forget to put your thing. Is I'm going to now go dry them for you. Next time, think about this. Yeah,
that's what I do all the time. It's always about what are the consequences of your actions? How can you prepare for success? And I tell my kids that they're gonna like fucking shoot them. they're gonna be like, oh my God, my mom used to say that. But I do every morning. I'm like, how are you preparing yourself for success? Do you have your water bottle? Do you have your lunch? Do you have your day timer? Do you have the pair of shoes? Do you have your hoodie? It's floor hockey day. Did you grab your stick? And it's funny because you feel like you're crazy, but we are the frontal lobe to our kids. And that was a good reminder for me at one point, learning that again. Like, oh, right, they don't really have a fully developed frontal lobe. That is our job to remind 17 times, right? I
had one with Griffin with mowing the lawn. He was using an electric mower, which I hate, but it was lighter for him. And it's like, but okay, now if you mow, I said, you want to mow like this. So you kind of go in this pattern like this so that you don't ever have the cord get caught or stuck around you the tree. And he's like, no, I'm going to do it this way. And I'm like, bud, I'm telling you, I'm not saying this to be a dick. I've done this. Trust me. He's like, no. I'm like, okay, fine. I sat down in the chair, watched him do the circle thing as it got wrapped around the tree. And eventually pulled the cord out. He had to, Dad, can you help? I'm like, no, you put yourself there. Untangle it. Yeah. And the next time he mowed the lawn, he did it. And I said to him again, I'm like, I'm not saying that to control you. Yeah. I've done this. I've been your age. I've made the mistakes. I'm trying to spare you.
And the difference between that and previous generations is previous generations would not have given the option to choose for himself. Yeah. You would have given the warning and that was it. And that kid would have been so scared to defy you, they would have done it your way. Yeah. So the fact that Griffin said, no, Dad, I'm doing it my way is actually a huge testament to how much safety you have for him to be an authentic version of himself, his own brain, his own whatever. Yep. The other thing is yes, you had a firm response. You didn't become abusive. And that is what would have happened back then.
Oh, yeah, big time.
Yeah. That is where the shift happened. So I want you guys to all think about some of these things and how you parent differently maybe than you were parented, or maybe you parent similarly because it was a healthy expression. I mean, most of the time we don't have as many healthy experiences. A lot of them is, we simply could not have all of our needs met based on, the stress and requirements of parents at certain times or whatever that looks like, right? So usually there is some difficulty that needs to be worked through. For myself, on Father's Day here, it is mostly, again, like the absence of my dad. That is not something that I feel sad about. I tend to honor more on this day, and that's just a really cool place that I'm at in my grief over these years. I also want to celebrate people like Kevin in my kids' lives and just even who he is in his kids' lives and appreciate that. the people who are in father-like roles around. And I always equipped my kids to appreciate their dad so that they feel like they gave what they wanted to show, because kids often are under-resourced and they can't go do the things they want to do by themselves. So that's a courtesy I always extend in terms of what do my kids feel like they need or want to do, and I help equip them with that.
Nice.
Right?
Nice.
But yeah, I would say that is my, that's sort of what wraps up for me. What is on your list of like, what do I want to do for Father's Day? And you probably also look at friends of yours like Pete and stuff, and you're like, yeah, these are my buddies. They were all dads. Like you were talking about your one, why do I forget his name? For kid.
Oh, Carl.
Carl. Yeah, Carl, right? You almost want to send Carl a fucking like meal or something, right? Like,
oh yeah,
here you go, buddy. Happy Father's Day. Right?
You survived.
You survived. Holy man. Yeah, what's on your agenda?
I have no clue. I know, because it's usually a day like we do something as a family, like a dinner. Yeah. But just like Jess Griffin and I.
Yeah. What's a favorite dinner? Like if you could pick.
Oh, prime rib.
Prime rib.
Only eat it like once a year. You know what I mean? It's prime rib somewhere where they make good prime rib.
Twisted Steak's got pretty good prime
rib.
Yeah,
that'd be a good one. And if it's the weather's nice, I like to sit outside by the pool, read.
Yep.
That kind of thing.
Your cigar. He's got a nice humidor downstairs now. It was the first thing I noticed when I walked in today. I was like, oh, you got your cigars all nice.
Oh, yeah, right?
Humidified.
So just that. So it's not really that different than the average day other than there's no work involved. You know what I mean? And just more relaxing. And like usually with Mother's Day, Jess wants the same thing. She just wants a day to kind of kick back and do what she wants to do.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, a far greater gift than trying to plan some big elaborate, unless your wife or father or spouse or whatever's into that.
Yeah. Okay, so on Mother's Day, one of the common things people struggle with is like, how do I... I think Jillian Harris posted this hilarious thing, like Mother's Day is a 3-day event. The first one is with her friends and she's going to celebrate with her friends. The second one is split half with his mom and half with her mom. And then Sunday is her day.
Yeah.
Right? And even if you fuck it up and you don't have anything prepared, get those kids out of the house at 8:00 and make it look like you planned for her to have a quiet morning.
Yeah. Oh,
right?
for sure.
Like,
no, totally.
Just leave the house and pretend you planned it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? But so that's often a bit of a juggle of like, how do we make the moms all feel like they got their time and appreciation? And for me, like Mother's Day falls on like close to Marshall's birthday and it's Mother's Day. It's always this mashup of things. So for you, we never actually talk about Jess's family and stuff, but is that something she has to balance? Is like a Father's Day for her dad on that same day?
Not so much anymore.
Okay. Yeah. So even taking into to account things like that. So that's where your partner could also be struggling at the same time.
Absolutely. That's kept in mind, right?
Yeah.
But that relationship is so fucked up that it's not really much of an issue anymore.
But that in itself is a grief point. Yeah. Because I don't have someone or something to celebrate right now, there is a void there. And even if it's a chosen void, it's a void. It exists that day.
For sure.
So you make space for it. And you notice that, like, even just for people I recommend, like, just acknowledge it's a crunchy point. And you know what? Here's what we're going to celebrate. But if you need to just have a moment around this because this part really sucks, let her rip.
Yep, exactly.
What do you need?
Space,
what do you need, right?
Space there or whatever's needed in a conversation.
Because a lot of people are scared to approach those topics, right? Like, especially if a parent has... passed, and it's like, well, I don't want to cloud your day because we're also celebrating you as a dad, and sometimes we just need space for each and every one of those.
Yeah, giving it space, time, consideration.
Totally. Yeah.
So there you go. Fathers.
Fathers.
The father.
I am your father. I like good.
It's just good. Oh, Austin Powers.
There we go. All right. Thank you, everybody, for listening to all the dads and dad-like folks out there, the ones who wish they could be dads and weren't dads.
Yes, there's that whole area there, right?
All of the things. We love you. We appreciate you. We see you. And we know that you are doing your best.
Yes. But we'll be back next week with even more insights on your next favorite episode of the Into Greatness podcast. I am Jason.
And I'm Jolene.
Peace out.